Goodbye, Romans. Hello, Anglo-Saxons. Imagine Britain in the year 410. For nearly 400 years, it had been a part of the mighty Roman Empire. The people living here, the Romano-Britons, were used to Roman laws, Roman roads, and Roman money. They lived in towns with impressive stone buildings and comfortable villas with heated floors. But the Roman Empire was in terrible trouble far away. It was being attacked by enemies, and it needed all its soldiers back home to defend its heartland. So, the Roman legions packed their bags and sailed away from Britain, leaving the island to fend for itself. It must have been a very frightening and uncertain time for the people left behind. Without the protection of the Roman army, Britain became a vulnerable place. The Romano-Britons were not soldiers. They were farmers, traders and artisans who had forgotten how to fight. Raiders from across the sea, like the Picts from what we now call Scotland and the Scotti from Ireland, saw their chance. They began to attack the coasts, stealing goods and causing chaos. The local British leaders found themselves in a desperate situation. They needed help, and they looked across the North Sea to the fierce warrior tribes of Germany and Denmark. This decision to hire foreign soldiers would change the course of Britain's history forever. The people who answered the call were what we now call the Anglo-Saxons. They came from different tribes, mainly the Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes. At first they were paid mercenaries hired to fight off the Picts and Scotti, but they soon saw that Britain was a rich and fertile land, much better than their own swampy homelands. They liked what they saw, and they decided they didn't just want to be visitors, they wanted to stay. So more and more of them began to arrive in their longships, not as protectors, but as settlers looking for a new home to conquer and farm. The arrival of the Anglo-Saxons was not a peaceful process. It was an invasion. Over many decades, these newcomers fought against the native Britons, slowly pushing them westwards into the areas we now know as Wales, Cornwall, and parts of Scotland. The Roman towns and villas were abandoned and fell into ruin. The Anglo-Saxons were not city dwellers. They preferred to live in small villages made of wood. They brought their own language, which we call Old English, and their own gods, like Woden and Thor. The Roman way of life faded away, and a new Anglo-Saxon Britain began to take its place. As the Anglo-Saxons settled, they didn't form one single country. Instead, they created many small, separate kingdoms, each with its own king, who was usually the strongest warrior. These kingdoms often fought against each other for land and power. Over time, 7 main kingdoms became the most powerful, and historians sometimes call this period the Heptarchy, which means 7 rulers. The most important of these were Northumbria in the north, Mercia in the middle, and Wessex in the south. Life was organized around loyalty to your local lord and king, and society was built on farming and fighting. These early Anglo-Saxons were pagans. They worshipped many different gods and goddesses connected to nature, war, and fate. They believed in monsters and dragons, and you can still read about these beliefs in their epic poems, like the famous story of Beowulf. They didn't build stone temples like the Romans. Instead, they might have worshipped in sacred groves of trees or in large wooden halls. They buried their important leaders in great style. A fantastic example is the ship burial found at Sutton Hoo, where a king was laid to rest in a huge ship, surrounded by incredible treasures like a helmet, sword, and gold buckles. However, a huge change was coming from across the sea once again. This time, it wasn't warriors, but missionaries bringing a new religion, Christianity. In the year 597, the Pope in Rome sent a monk named Augustine to convert the Anglo-Saxons. He landed in the Kingdom of Kent and successfully converted its king, Ethelbert. At the same time, Irish monks were spreading their own version of Christianity down from the north. Slowly but surely, the new faith spread from kingdom to kingdom. Kings and queens were baptized, and the old pagan gods were gradually forgotten. This was a massive turning point for the country. The arrival of Christianity brought much more than just a new faith. It reconnected England to the learning and culture of Europe. Monks built monasteries, which became incredible centers of knowledge. They could read and write, which was a very rare skill at the time. They wrote down laws, recorded history, and copied out beautiful religious books by hand, decorating them with gold and colorful illustrations. One of the most famous of these was the Venerable Bede, a monk from Northumbria who wrote the first history of the English people. This new wave of learning and religion helped to bring the rival Anglo-Saxon kingdoms closer together. Just as the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were becoming more settled and civilized, a new and terrible threat appeared from the sea. In 793, fierce warriors from Scandinavia, known as the Vikings, launched a shocking raid on the holy monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria. They killed the monks and stole all the precious treasures. This was just the beginning of what historians call the Viking Age. For the next century, Viking longships would attack the coasts of Britain relentlessly. They were looking for treasure, slaves, and eventually land to settle, just as the Anglo-Saxons had done centuries before. The Viking attacks grew larger and more organized. They were no longer simple hit-and-run raids. Great armies of Vikings arrived, determined to conquer the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms one by one. They were incredibly successful. They captured the kingdom of Northumbria, then East Anglia, and then the great central kingdom of Mercia. By the 870s, only one major Anglo-Saxon kingdom was left standing, the southern kingdom of Wessex. It seemed almost certain that the Vikings would conquer the whole of England and destroy the Anglo-Saxon way of life completely. The future of England hung by a thread. The King of Wessex at this desperate time was a man named Alfred. He was not a natural warrior. He was a thoughtful and religious man who loved learning. But when the Vikings invaded his kingdom, he was forced to become a brilliant military leader. At one point, he was defeated and had to hide in the marshes of Somerset, a true low point in his struggle. But Alfred did not give up. He gathered a new army and, in a great battle at Edington in 878, he won a decisive victory against the Vikings. This victory saved his kingdom and saved England from complete Viking conquest. Alfred's victory was about more than just one battle. He made a peace treaty with the Viking leader, Guthrum, which divided England into two parts. Alfred and the Anglo-Saxons would rule the south and west, while the Vikings would rule the north and east, an area that became known as the Danelaw. Alfred was not just a soldier, he was a great ruler. He reorganized his army, built a network of fortified towns called burhs to defend against future attacks, and started a navy. He also believed education was vital, and he arranged for important books to be translated from Latin into Old English so his people could read them. He is the only English king ever to be called the Great. Alfred the Great had saved Wessex and preserved the flame of Anglo-Saxon culture, but he had not created a single united England. That enormous task would be left to his children and grandchildren. After Alfred died, his son Edward the Elder and his remarkable daughter Ethelflaed, who was known as the Lady of the Mercians, continued his work. They didn't just defend their lands, they went on the attack. Working together, this brother and sister team fought back against the Vikings in the Danelaw, systematically recapturing towns and territory that had been lost. Edward and Ethelflaed continued Alfred's strategy of building fortified burhs as they advanced, securing each piece of land they conquered. It was a slow and difficult process, a war that lasted for many years. Ethelflaed was an extraordinary figure, a woman leading armies and ruling a kingdom in an age dominated by men. She was a brilliant strategist and was respected by her soldiers. Together, she and Edward pushed the boundaries of Anglo-Saxon rule further and further north. By the time Edward died, he controlled almost all of England south of the River Humber, laying the foundations for his own son to complete the job. The final piece of the puzzle was put in place by Edward's son Aethelstan, who became king in 925. Aethelstan was ambitious, clever, and a formidable warrior. He had a grand vision, not just to rule Wessex and Mercia, but to fulfill his grandfather Alfred's dream of a single, united kingdom of all the English people. In 927, he marched north and conquered the last great Viking kingdom, the Kingdom of York. For the first time, one man ruled all the lands that we now call England. The kings of Scotland and Wales also came to meet him and acknowledged him as their overlord. Aethelstan's reign marked the true birth of England. In 937, he cemented his power by winning a huge and bloody battle at a place called Brunanburh, where he defeated a combined army of Scots, Britons and Vikings who had joined forces to try and crush him. After this great victory, his position as the first king of England was secure. He created a unified system of laws and a single currency for the whole country. The long journey from the scattered, warring tribes left behind by the Romans was finally over. A new nation, England, with its own language, culture and monarchy, had been born.